Okay, moving on to the next segment of today's show. As you guys know, over the last couple episodes, what I've been doing is picking out a different division in the National Football League each episode, and during that episode, recapping their draft and kind of give like a kind of a current state of the union, kind of how I currently feel about their team and how they're going to finish next season. And the division we're going to be doing today is the NFC South. And I want to talk first about each team in the NFC South's draft, how I felt about it. Do I think they filled the proper holes and, so on. So the first team we'll be starting off with in terms of the draft recaps is the New Orleans Saints. And the New Orleans Saints, in terms of their draft, are a very interesting team because they're kind of similar to the Kansas City Chiefs, whose draft we went over last episode, because they didn't really have that clear of a hole. You know, they have their quarterback, they have Michael Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders as skill position players, they have Alvin Kamara, they have a good offensive line, have a lot of good names on defense, and with their first round pick, number 24 overall, they select Cesar Ruiz, the center from Michigan, and I think it was a solid pick. I think it's never a bad idea to upgrade your offensive line, especially at center, which I feel like out of the current New Orleans Saints offensive line, that probably would be their one spot of weakness. The Saints also took Zach Baum, the outside linebacker from Wisconsin, with the number 74 pick in the draft. And I think those two guys are going to do a pretty solid job bolstering the New Orleans Saints 2020 draft class. But I said it once again, a big thing and a big key to be successful in the 2020 version of the National Football League, right, is you need to get and produce with your draft picks. And the New Orleans Saints a couple years ago in the 2017 NFL draft did a really nice job of doing that. They took Marshawn Lattimore, they took Alvin Kamara, they took Marcus Williams, they took Ryan Ramczyk. Those four guys all in the same draft. And when you combine those young guys that they got through the draft, and you combine that with Drew Brees and Michael Thomas, that, you know, the dynamic playmakers of the world, and a good coach in Sean Payton, that is the proper mixture that you have when you're trying to win games. And for the New Orleans Saints, you know, we just spoke about the Cleveland Browns saying how this season is just very boom or bust, and if this season doesn't end up going well, I don't really know what exactly the future holds. I would put the New Orleans Saints in that same category, and I think they just drafted really the best defensive player available and the best offensive player available in Ruiz and Baum. I think both of them were solid picks. The Saints over the last couple of years, once again, have done a really nice job drafting. They're going to want some of their first-round picks from the last couple of years. I'd probably say to step up a little more and play a little better. Marcus Davenport in particular is the one name that really stands out. I think he's going to have to be really good if the Saints want to succeed. But at the same time, you know, Bound and Ruiz are both solid picks. It's never a bad idea to address offensive line, especially when the Saints finally filled, I think, which was their big need in the offseason, signing Emmanuel Sanders and having him produce as the number 2 wide receiver. So I'd give the Saints draft a B+. That would be my final and official draft grade for them. Moving on to the next team in the NFC South, whose draft we'll be going over, that would be a team that I actually think had a really good draft, and that would be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And with the number 13th overall pick, they moved up one spot and took Tristan Wirfs, the offensive tackle from the University of Iowa, and I love this pick. Going into the draft, I said the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have one clear hole that they really need to address, and that was the offensive tackle position. I think their offensive line is fine with Ali Marpet, Ryan Jensen in the middle, but they just really needed tackles to step up and protect Tom Brady. A big reason as to why I believe Tom Brady wasn't very successful in New England last season and didn't have one of the better seasons of his career, in addition to, you know, his age and his declining skill set, was the offensive line. Last year's New England Patriot offensive line was one of the worst offensive lines I've ever seen. And the Tampa Bay Buccaneers really, if they could have all the weapons they want, right? Godwin, Evans, we know them all. Gronk, a good defense, but your quarterback can succeed, and we saw it with the Cleveland Browns last year without a good offensive line. And I said the two main excuses for the Cleveland Browns last year were poor coaching and poor O-line play. And I think the same thing kind of, you know, sets into the equation with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. If Tristan Wirfs could protect Tom Brady, I think it will end up being a very good pick. And, can't criticize a team that has an older quarterback stocking up on offensive line and just trying to protect him. And for the value that they got Wirfs at, I think it was a good pick. A lot of people expected him to go in the top 5 as early as 4 to the New York Giants. Later in the draft, continuing at them, the Buccaneers take at number 45 overall, Antoine Winfield Jr., the safety from Minnesota. Antoine Winfield Sr., as we know, is a former National Football League player, so it's always cool to see that relationship develop. And when I look at Antoine Winfield going to the the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I actually think this is a pretty solid pick because Winfield is solid value. He made a lot of really good plays and high-level plays at Minnesota. And I think when you look at safety, Winfield is a guy that can start right away, and that is a position of need for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I love their young corners in Jamal Dean and Carlton Davis. Both those guys really stepped up toward the back end of last year, and I've said it a lot about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense, where last year they weren't bad. They weren't a weakness, especially towards the back end of the season. And I think the big reason as to why they lost so many games last year was because of poor quarterback play. I understand Tom Brady's skill set may be declining a little bit, but with proper protection, I think Brady could still succeed in Tampa Bay because he has the best brain out of probably anyone in the National Football League. And I think when the Buccaneers defense, right, is given a offense where it's not turning the ball over, literally possession after possession after possession, they will be in a better spot and succeed from that. And that's, I think, an element of this Tampa Bay Buccaneers team that not a lot of people are talking about. But I love this Buccaneer draft, getting Tristan Wirfs, getting Antoine Winfield. I'm going to give them an A. I gave Denver an A when I did their recap. I'm going to give Tampa Bay an A, man. I really do. I believe it. I think they're really good. I think Winfield and Wirfs are both going to be players that help right away. And I was a big fan of Jason Light and the Buccaneers draft. Okay, moving on to the next team whose draft we'll be going over. That is the NFC South's Carolina Panthers. And when I look at the Carolina Panthers draft, this is a team whose draft also kind of really stood out to me due to the fact that they actually didn't take one offensive player. And when I first heard that, I was kind of like, all right, like what's going on here? Like, why would they do that? But then kind of the more and more and closer I looked at the situation, I actually kind of like what the Carolina Panthers and Matt Rule did with this draft. And they take Derek Brown, number 7 overall, the second best defensive line prospect in the draft behind Chase Young, probably the best defensive tackle in this draft. They take him at number 7 overall. They take Yetur Gross-Matos, the edge rusher from Penn State, at number 38 overall. And they get Jeremy Chin, the safety from Southern Illinois, at number 64 overall, which according to most draft analysts really was a good value pick, and as was Gross-Matos. And the reason as to why I like this Carolina Panthers draft so much is because they had plenty of holes on defense that they had to recover from, right? The main reason as to why I don't love the Carolina Panthers this year in 2020, and as to why I'm not as high on them as a lot of other people, is because they just lost so much from their defense. They lost Luke Kuechly, James Bradbury, Gerald McCoy. They just lost Eric Reed as well. They just lost so much from last year's squad, and also their coach and quarterback in Ron Rivera and Cam Newton, and it is a new era in Carolina. So Matt Rule gets there and says, all right, let me just fill as many holes as possible, and he does that by taking Brown, taking Gross-Matos to really beef up their defensive line. They take Jeremy Chin, the safety from Southern Illinois. I love Dante Jackson as a young corner in the NFL. He's a guy that not a lot of people know about that I think could be a really good player, and Carolina actually addressed their needs on the offensive side of the ball in free agency. Personally, do I think they overpaid Teddy Bridgewater? Absolutely. I don't think he's as good as the money as he got, and I don't necessarily know if he's going to be the future franchise quarterback in Carolina. But at the same time, he showed you last year in New Orleans that he could give you good, competent quarterback play. You pair him with McCaffrey, and they bring in Robbie Anderson. They have DJ Moore, who's a very good young receiver. I like the direction things are going in Carolina. I think Matt Rule needs to find his franchise quarterback to run with for, the back end of his 7-year contract, and I think things can eventually end up working out there. But at the same time, in terms of the 2020 Panthers draft, they really prioritized it on defense and getting better and filling holes on that side of the ball. So I'm going to give the Carolina Panthers draft a B+. I like what they did, taking a member of the secondary, taking a member of the defensive line, and Gross-Matos could play a little bit on the edge, so he could play linebacker as well. So Carolina did a really nice job addressing all 3 units of their defense in the draft. And moving on to the final team in the NFC South whose draft we'll be going over, that would be the Atlanta Falcons. And the Falcons had the 16th pick, and they were a team that I think really had to address the defensive side of the ball in this draft. When you look at who their quarterback is, they bring in Todd Gurley, have Jones and Ridley at receiver. They've drafted offensive line over the last couple of years with Lidstrom and Jake Matthews, bringing in Chris Lindstrom. Caleb McGarry is the other guy that they took in the first round last year. And with their first pick, they take A.J. Terrell, the corner from Clemson. And I didn't love this pick because I understand you want to replace Desmond Trufant, but AJ Terrell at number 16 overall was a little bit of a reach. This dude got lit up in the national championship game, and I just don't think his skill set is worth the 16th pick. But if Dan Quinn really thinks that that's his guy, let's see what he could do. With the number 47 pick, they take Marlon Davidson, the big defensive end from Auburn. I think that was a fine pick if you want to have him, beef up your defensive line, pair him, to go along with Grady Jarrett and Tyler Davison. They also take with the number 78 pick, Matt Hennessy, the center from Temple. I think that was a solid pick because Alex Mack is getting a little up there in age, and I think if any part of your offensive line is going to have to be replaced within the next couple years, it is center. But Atlanta, they address defense, and personally, I don't love AJ Terrell. I think they really reached for him. I think if they could have traded back and to maybe 20 or 21, he definitely could have been there. Maybe he could have gotten another pick. I didn't even have this guy going in the first round in my mock draft. There were plenty of other cornerbacks they could have taken that were there, like Damon Arnett, like Christian Fulton, like Jeff Gladney from TCU, who ended up going to Minnesota. I think Jeff Gladney, besides maybe Jeff Okudah and CJ Henderson, is going to end up being the best corner in this draft. So I was very high on him, but it turns out the Atlanta Falcons liked AJ Terrell a little more, and it's not like I could blame them for that. But at the same time, Atlanta, they really just needed to address any part of their defense. The defense was a unit that cost them a lot of games over the last couple of years. I like Grady Jarrett. I like Deion Jones. I like Isaiah Oliver as a nice young corner. And if Terrell is good and they could pair those two together, I think Atlanta could be decent next season. And we're going to get to this next when we talk about where do all four teams in the NFC South currently stand. I do feel a little bit like the Atlanta Falcons could be one of the more forgotten teams in not only the AFC South, or the NFC South, but the whole National Football League, because they have the talent to win games, and they finished last season off very strong. And we're going to get to this in a little bit once again when we start the deep dive preview with the Atlanta Falcons. But overall, I'm going to give the Atlanta Falcons draft grade a C+ because I like the positions they addressed. That's why the plus comes in. But I just think they really reached for AJ Terrell, and they could have traded back. But we'll see how Dan Quinn, Thomas Dimitroff, and the Falcons end up valuing this draft.